Imagine being 16 years old. Imagine waking up one morning as a queen and 9 days later, you're kneeling on a scaffold, blindfolded, reaching desperately through the darkness for the block where your head will be severed from your body. Your hands grasp at empty air. You're crying. You're alone. And in moments an axe will end your life. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Lady Jane Grey, the teenage queen who never wanted a crown, and whose brief reign ended in one of history's most heartbreaking executions. February 12, 1554. The Tower of London. A cold morning mist hangs over the execution ground. Inside the tower walls, away from public view, a scaffold has been erected. The straw beneath it will soon be soaked in royal blood. Lady Jane Grey, just 17 years old, walks toward her death with a small prayer book clutched in her trembling hands. She's dressed entirely in black. Her face is pale, her eyes red from crying, but she holds her head high. She never wanted to be queen. She begged them not to make her queen. And now she's about to die because powerful men played games with her life like she was a chess piece on their board of ambition. How did an innocent, bookish teenager become caught in a web of Tudor political intrigue so deadly that it cost her everything? How did 9 days on England's throne lead to the executioner's block? And what were her final moments really like? Those terrifying seconds when she couldn't find the block, when panic overtook her dignity. If you want to hear the forgotten truths of history, the stories they don't teach in school, the human moments behind the dates and names, then subscribe right now. Because what happened to Lady Jane Grey is a story of manipulation, betrayal, and a young girl's courage in the face of absolute terror. And you need to hear it. Let's go back to where it all began. Lady Jane Grey was born into danger, even if she didn't know it yet. Born in October 1537, Jane was a great-granddaughter of Henry VII, which meant she had royal Tudor blood running through her veins. In the deadly world of Tudor England, royal blood was both a gift and a curse. It could make you powerful beyond measure, or it could get you killed. Jane wasn't raised to be a queen. She was raised to be a pawn. Her parents, the Duke and Duchess of Suffolk, were ambitious, cold, and ruthless. They saw their daughter not as a child to be loved, but as a tool to be used. Jane was beaten regularly for minor infractions. She was denied affection. She was pushed relentlessly into her studies, not because her parents valued education, but because a learned daughter could attract a more powerful husband. And Jane? She found refuge in books. She learned Latin, Greek, Hebrew, French, and Italian. She studied theology and philosophy. While other noble girls were learning to dance and flirt, Jane was reading Plato in the original Greek. She was brilliant. She was serious. She was deeply religious. And she was utterly unprepared for the political storm that was about to consume her. Picture this. It's 1553. King Edward VI, Henry VIII's only son, is dying. He's 15 years old and wasting away from tuberculosis. England is in crisis. Edward is Protestant, but his half-sister Mary, next in line for the throne, is Catholic. If Mary becomes queen, she'll drag England back to Rome, back to Catholicism, and the Protestant nobles will lose everything. Their power, their lands, possibly their lives. So they hatch a plan. A desperate, treasonous plan. The Duke of Northumberland, the most powerful man in England, decides to bypass Mary's claim to the throne entirely. He'll put someone else on the throne instead. Someone Protestant. Someone controllable. Someone young and innocent enough to be manipulated. Someone like Lady Jane Grey. Jane is married off to Northumberland's son, Guilford Dudley, in a rushed ceremony. She doesn't love him. She barely knows him. But that doesn't matter. The trap is being set. When Edward VI dies on July 6, 1553, Jane is summoned to Sion House. She thinks she's being called to visit an ill relative. Instead, she's told that Edward has named her his successor in his will. She's told that she is now Queen of England. Jane collapses. She cries. She refuses. She says she's not worthy, that Mary is the rightful heir. But Northumberland and the other lords surround her. They pressure her. They manipulate her faith, telling her it's God's will. They use her religious devotion against her. Can you imagine? You're 16 years old, you've never wanted power, you know this is wrong, you know this is treason, and the most powerful men in England are surrounding you, forcing a crown onto your head. What would you have done? Would you have had the strength to refuse? Jane didn't. Or rather, she couldn't. She accepted the crown with tears streaming down her face, believing perhaps that God had truly chosen her for this burden. She was Queen of England for 9 days. 9 days. What went through your mind when you were 16? Were you worried about exams? About friendships? About your future? Jane Grey was worrying about staying alive long enough to see 17. Here's where everything collapses. Mary Tudor, the rightful heir, isn't going down without a fight. While Jane sits uncomfortably on the throne in the Tower of London, Mary is rallying support across England. And the people? They side with Mary. Not because they necessarily love her, but because she's the legitimate heir. Jane is seen as a usurper, a puppet of ambitious men. Within days, Jane's support crumbles like sand. Northumberland rides out with an army to capture Mary, but his forces desert him. The Privy Council, those same men who forced Jane to take the crown, suddenly switch sides and declare Mary the rightful queen. Jane's own father is the one who tells her it's over. He enters her chambers and personally tears down the canopy of state above her head, the symbol of her queenship. Just 9 days after being forced to accept the crown, Jane is told she's no longer queen. She's relieved. She never wanted this. She thinks maybe, just maybe, she can go home now. Go back to her books. Disappear into obscurity. But she's not going home. She's going to a cell. Mary initially doesn't want to execute Jane. She knows Jane was manipulated. She knows Jane is just a teenager caught in a conspiracy she didn't create. But there's a problem. As long as Jane lives, she's a threat. She's a Protestant figurehead. She's a potential rallying point for rebellions. And then disaster. In early 1554, Sir Thomas Wyatt leads a Protestant rebellion trying to overthrow Mary and put Jane back on the throne. Jane knows nothing about it. She's locked in the tower. But it doesn't matter. Her very existence is dangerous. Mary's advisors convince her, Jane must die. Not because she's guilty, but because she's dangerous alive. On February 12, 1554, Jane is told she will be executed that morning. She has hours to prepare to die. Hours to say goodbye to the world. Hours to write final letters that she hopes will explain her innocence. She writes to her father, who's also been condemned, Father, although it has pleased God to hasten my death by you, yet can I so patiently take it as I would wish you to do. She forgives him. Even though his ambition helped put her on the throne. Even though his choices led to this scaffold. She forgives him. And then comes the moment that will haunt you. Jane is led to the scaffold inside the tower grounds. Private execution, a small mercy sparing her the jeering crowds of a public beheading. She sees the block. She sees the executioner in his mask. She sees the straw on the ground placed there to soak up her blood. She delivers a short speech, her voice shaking but clear. Good people, I am come hither to die, and by Allah I am condemned to the same. My offense was only in consent to the device of others, which now is deemed treason. She recites Psalm 51. She forgives the executioner. She asks him to dispatch her quickly. And then, this is where it gets unbearable, she's blindfolded. The moment the cloth covers her eyes, Jane's composure shatters. She can't see. She drops to her knees but can't find the block. She reaches out with both hands, groping desperately in the darkness, and she cries out, What shall I do? Where is it? There's a moment, a horrible, suspended moment, where this teenage girl is on her hands and knees, blindfolded, searching for the place where she's about to die, and no one immediately helps her. Can you imagine the terror? The confusion? The humiliation even in death? Finally, someone guides her hands to the block. She lays her head down. She speaks her last words, Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit. The axe falls. One clean blow. It's over. A 17-year-old girl, guilty of nothing except being born with royal blood and being manipulated by powerful men, is dead. Her blood soaks into the straw. Her body is wrapped in cloth and buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, within the Tower of London, in an unmarked grave. Drop a comment right now and tell me, do you think Jane Grey deserved to die? Or was she just another victim of the Tudor death machine? I want to hear what you think. In the cold political calculus of Tudor England, Jane Grey's execution made perfect sense. Eliminate the threat. Secure the throne. Move on. But in human terms? It was a tragedy that haunted everyone involved. Mary Tudor, who ordered the execution, would later be known as Bloody Mary, for burning hundreds of Protestants at the stake. But historians suggest she genuinely regretted Jane's death. Jane was her cousin. Jane was an innocent pawn. Some accounts say Mary cried when she signed the death warrant. But monarchs don't have the luxury of mercy when their throne is threatened, or at least that's what they tell themselves. Jane's father, the Duke of Suffolk, was executed just days after his daughter. He had joined Wyatt's rebellion, the very uprising that sealed Jane's fate. Did he feel guilt as he laid his own head on the block? Did he think of his daughter in those final moments? We'll never know. But his ambition killed both himself and his child. Guilford Dudley, Jane's husband, was executed the same day as Jane, just hours before her. From her window in the tower, Jane watched as his body was carried back in a cart, his head wrapped in cloth. Some say they grew to care for each other during their imprisonment. Some say she wept when she saw his corpse. Whether or not they loved each other, they died together. Two teenagers sacrificed on the altar of political ambition. And Northumberland, the architect of the whole scheme? He was executed months earlier in August 1553. In a final act of cowardice, he publicly converted back to Catholicism before his death, hoping for a pardon that never came. The man who manipulated Jane, who forced her to take a crown she never wanted, abandoned even his own religious convictions to save his neck. It didn't work. Jane's legacy is complicated. During her lifetime she was barely known. 9 days on the throne isn't enough to make policy or leave a mark. But in death she became a Protestant martyr. Writers, artists and historians transformed her into a symbol, the innocent victim, the pure soul destroyed by political evil. In 1833 the French painter Paul de la Roche created The Execution of Lady Jane Grey, one of the most famous paintings of the 19th century. It shows Jane in a pure white dress, blindfolded, reaching desperately for the block. It's a stunning image, tragic, beautiful, heartbreaking. Millions have seen that painting. It hangs in the National Gallery in London, and people still stand before it in silence, moved by the fate of a girl they never knew. Victorian England especially romanticized Jane. She became the subject of novels, plays, and poems. She was the tragic heroine, the girl too good for the brutal world she lived in. Some of this was propaganda. Protestants used her story to demonize Catholic Mary. But beneath the mythology is a real girl who really died, and whose death really was unjust. If you visit the Tower of London today, you can see the approximate spot where Jane was executed. There's a memorial on Tower Green, a simple circular glass pillow inscribed with the names of those executed there. Jane Grey's name is among them, alongside Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, other women destroyed by the machinery of Tudor politics. Her body remains in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. For centuries her grave was unmarked. But in the Victorian era, her remains were identified during renovations, and a small memorial floor tile was placed in the chapel. Visitors come to pay their respects to a queen who reigned for 9 days and died in terror at 17. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear this forgotten truth. Because Jane Grey deserves to be remembered, not just as a footnote in history, but as a human being who suffered and died with dignity even when the world gave her none. So what does a 16th century execution have to do with your life today? More than you think. Lady Jane Grey's story isn't just about kings and queens and political intrigue. Strip away the crowns and the Tudor drama, and what you're left with is something painfully universal. The story of a young person forced into a role they never wanted by people who claimed to know what was best for them. How many of us have been pressured into paths we didn't choose? How many of us have felt the weight of other people's expectations crushing down on us? Parents, teachers, bosses, society, telling us who we should be, what we should want, what we should sacrifice. Jane wanted to read books. She wanted to study. She wanted a quiet life. Instead, she got a crown, a scaffold, and an axe. She was told it was God's will, that it was her duty, that she had no choice. And in the end, those lies cost her everything. Think about the people who manipulated her. Northumberland didn't care about Jane. Her own parents didn't protect her. Even her faith, the one thing she cherished most, was weaponized against her by men who used religion as a tool for control. They told her that accepting the crown was righteous, that refusing would be sinful. They manipulated her conscience. Here's the lesson: your life is yours. Not your parents. Not your bosses. Not society's. When people pressure you into choices by claiming it's for your own good, by guilting you, by manipulating your sense of duty, stop and ask yourself, who benefits from this? Is this really what I want or what someone else wants from me? Jane couldn't say no. She lived in a time when a teenage girl had no power, no voice, no ability to refuse powerful men. But you can. You live in a different world. You have choices Jane never had. And here's the thing that breaks my heart. Jane's final moments weren't about politics or religion or royal blood. They were about fear. Human primal fear. She was blindfolded and couldn't find the block, and she cried out in terror. In that moment she wasn't a queen. She wasn't a political symbol. She was just a scared kid who didn't want to die. When everything is stripped away, the titles, the causes, the justifications, we're all just people trying to survive, trying to find meaning, trying to avoid pain. Jane's story reminds us that behind every historical event, behind every name in a textbook, there was a living, breathing, feeling human being who laughed and cried and hoped and feared just like you do. So honor her memory by living boldly, by refusing to be manipulated, by recognizing when people are using you for their own agendas, by standing up for the powerless, the voiceless, the ones being crushed by forces bigger than themselves. Jane Grey couldn't change her fate, but you can change yours. She died at 17, but her story lives on. And maybe that's the one small victory we can claim for her, that nearly 500 years later we're still here, still talking about her, still moved by her courage and heartbroken by her fate. She mattered. She matters. Remember her. Lady Jane Grey's story is one of the most tragic in English history, but she's far from the only innocent who died in the Tudor bloodbath. Next time I'm going to tell you about another execution. One even more shocking, even more unjust. We're talking about a woman who was the king's favorite. A woman who was intelligent, charming, and beloved by the people. A woman who King Henry VIII was obsessed with, who he moved heaven and earth to marry, who he broke with the Catholic Church to half. And then he had her head cut off. I'm talking about Anne Boleyn. And the real story, the one behind the mythology, is darker and more complex than you've ever heard. We're going to dive into the conspiracy that destroyed her, the mock trial where she was found guilty of crimes she didn't commit, and her final moments on the scaffold when she faced death with more courage than the king who ordered her execution. But here's the thing, if you don't subscribe right now you might miss it. YouTube's algorithm is brutal. If you're not subscribed, these videos vanish into the digital void. And these stories, these forgotten truths, these voices from the past crying out to be heard, they deserve better than to be forgotten again. So do this for Jane. Do this for Anne. Do this for every person in history whose story was buried, twisted, or erased. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Because history isn't just dates and names. It's blood. It's tears. It's real people who lived and died and deserve to be remembered. I'll see you in the next one. Don't let these stories die again.